And two veterans of that battle are here, Nigel Farage and Alastair Campbell. Welcome to both of you. Alastair Campbell, first of all, your reflections of the last 2 years.
Well, just watching the clips there just show. I mean, 2 years is a long time. It's half an Olympiad.
Or does it feel longer?
Well, it feels like 2 years, but it's 2 years in which, frankly, lots of the things that we said were going to happen are happening. Airbus today being the latest. Why are you sneering at Airbus?
It's a political project, Airbus, being funded by billions and billions of euros from
the only reason
from the European Union.
That's the only reason they're doing this. There's no real effect on jobs or living standards.
Just do accept the fact they've accepted over 10 billion euros worth of grants.
How much have you had out of the European Union over the years? Doesn't make you
nothing in terms of subsidy.
No, but honestly, let me just know you, Nigel.
Alastair, let Alastair speak and then I'll come to you, Nigel.
Let me finish. This is what is, in 2 years, we have gone from the referendum to the chaos that we have now, to negotiations going badly, to these people, anybody who says anything critical, they're just trying to stop Brexit. You have Parliament, frankly, I think, incapable of bringing the country together, the government incapable of agreeing on anything at all, and we are heading towards a cliff, and people like Nigel are just saying, come on, let's go and let's jump.
Nigel, your reflections then?
Well, the first reflection is the actual result itself was extraordinary. I mean, we had every big global business, every global leader, everyone telling us not to vote for Brexit, a massive imbalance of spending from one side to the other.
Although, of course, there are people looking at spending from both the Vote Leave and Leave.eu.
Yeah, well, Mr Cameron spent £9 million of our money putting a leaflet through each of our households.
Well, it's not about looking at it, it's looking to see whether it's criminal.
But was there any cheating?
No, of course not. Although, you know, I don't know how much George Soros spent on their side. All of that will come out in the wash. All of that will come out of the wash. But it's in some ways, it's not surprising that you've got the political class who are very wedded
to the political class,
to the European project, trying to prevent Brexit from happening. But I suppose the real problem, where we might agree, is I think the leadership, frankly, from Theresa May has been pitiful. There is no clear vision of what we're trying to achieve here. There's no clear... This is where we need to be in 3 or 4 years' time. All we're doing, effectively, is kicking the can down the road, making concession after concession. And I think, actually, most Brexit voters, some are angry, and some are just very frustrated with it.
All right, well, let's pick up on the Airbus warning that Alastair talked about just a moment ago. I mean, are you saying that we should ignore warnings from manufacturers like Airbus that this could be an early sign of economic pain to come?
Well, 20 years ago, when Alastair Campbell was trying to get us to join the euro, we had big... Well, Mr Blair, I remember seeing it.
All right, let's not have a row about the euro. Let's not have a row. We didn't join the euro.
And we had big companies then saying, unless Britain joins the euro, you know, we may well put our manufacturing... We will put our manufacturing out of Britain. We even had the Lord Mayor of the City of London telling us...
Hang on, Alastair, let him finish.
We even had Lord Levine, the Lord Mayor of the City of London, telling us if we don't join the euro, the city will disappear. So we've seen all this before.
Today, do you?
Now, Airbus is clearly...
Because 14,000 jobs, perhaps 100,000 jobs connected to it?
Airbus clearly is a very political project, the way it's been designed, funded, of course, by European Union money, currently expanding...
So that delegitimises everything they say.
Currently expanding their operations in the United Kingdom. Now, the timing of this is no coincidence, but I would remind people, you know, 80% of the British economy is what goes on within these islands. And one of the problems of the single market is single market regulation affects 100% of our economy. We voted to leave. We voted to leave the single market and to be in control of our own business regulations.
Alastair, I mean, respond, though, to what Nigel has said in terms of how representative Airbus is in terms of the disaster, as you see it, to come on Brexit.
It's one of the biggest... I was talking to somebody in Wales this morning. They're one of the biggest employers in Wales. I don't know why you're laughing at Wales as well.
Go on.
If this happens... No, wait a minute. If this happens... And these aren't theoretical decisions. That guy goes on the radio this morning, the chief financial operator. As he said, he's not a politician. He's not like you just spinning a line the whole time. He is making decisions now. And companies across Britain are making decisions now about leaving. And I'll tell you what I really hope about Airbus is that business, most of which agree with what Airbus is saying, that they actually start to get their heads above the parapet and that people understand if we carry on listening to people like Nigel and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Theresa May being driven by their strategy, we are in big trouble.
Or is it Project Fear, Alastair Campbell? Because you say these things... Well, hang on. You say these things are happening. Wait a moment. But we were told that there would be an economic catastrophe in the immediate aftermath.
I think there's
and that well, lots of people say that hasn't happened. So do you accept that there is a little bit of politics in the sort of stuff that Airbus is doing?
I don't think there's politics in what Airbus are doing. I think there is politics.
Come on, there is
politics attached to this debate, of course. But Project Fear lost to Project Lies. It was a terrible campaign on both sides, OK?
Can we just remind ourselves what we voted for? We voted
didn't vote to become... the single market.
We voted...
You said we wouldn't.
Oh, don't talk nonsense. We voted to become an independent country.
Which we've always been.
This was a political referendum, and I can argue we'll be far better off outside because 85% of the world's economy is outside the Eurozone. You can argue...
But it is a forecast, isn't it? Like any other forecast.
None of us, neither of us know whether we're right or not on the economics. But what we do know is we voted for independence, and the problem is we're not actually getting that. Because of a transition period, it's going to be at least 5 to 6 years before we have any prospect of making our own laws or controlling our own borders. That is the frustration.
Where I think Nigel and I probably will agree is that this transition, to give himself a little bit of time, we do become effectively a rule taker, not a rule maker. And that, I'm afraid, is because when she came in, this is the big problem. Nigel, going back to the referendum when it happened, Theresa May came in on the back of it. I understand she feels she has to deliver Brexit, but she's done so the whole way through by paying attention to 52%, and the 48% can go hang. And I think what you're going to see tomorrow with the People's Vote March in London, there are tens of thousands of people, will represent millions of people in this country who do not see this as a done deal and who actually believe, having given the government the job of going to negotiate the deal, they then want to have the final say on whether this is the deal they voted on.
Another referendum.
And I don't believe it.
But
a referendum on the final deal.
Yeah, of course.
But do you too?
It's the same old
scared of
because
that?
we were promised.
Why are you scared?
We were promised.
We were promised.
However we voted, the result would stand. And I've seen these tactics. I've seen them used in Ireland. I've seen them used in Denmark. And it's not going to happen to us in this country.
Do the two of you, though, represent the extremes of both sides that you represent in that sense? I mean, you came on the programme once before and said, to some extent you represent the 17.4 million who voted to leave, and Alastair thinks he represents the majority of those who voted Remain. But is that true now? Is it true, or actually are you two at the extreme ends of what you believe in? And there are a lot of people in the middle who actually say Remain or leave, let's get on with it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's where things have changed. 68 to 70% of people now say, can we please just get on with this?
I accept that. I agree with that. However, that is...
But are you not trying to overturn the result in some way by having a vote of the deal?
I'm trying to argue for what I believe in as a British patriot desperately worried about the direction the country's taking.
But does that represent the majority of Remain?
The only argument that Theresa May ever uses now, she never says this is going to be good for Britain. She never says this is going to be good for living standards. All she says is will of the people and fatalism. Let's get on with it.
Because she doesn't believe in it. That is the problem.
Well,
that is, and I would agree with you on that. There is a problem.
Well, let's turn to one of the other big issues of the referendum and a lot of the discussions that we've had since, and that's been immigration. And we're going to talk first of all about the settled status of EU citizens currently here and those who may come through the transition. Let's have a look at the front page of the Daily Mail. And while that goes up, what did you make of that front page, Nigel?
That isn't really the point. The fact that 3.5 million people had come to this country from the European Union legally, because that's what the law allowed, it should never have been in question. We're not a banana republic. The question was, what would happen hereafter? And from what I can see from Sajid Javid's comments yesterday, the open door continues for at least another 3 years. No wonder she needs 20 billion more for the health service. Our population is rising by 500,000 a year. And, we are not. We haven't even been promised that after 2021 there'll be any controls put in place. And that, to me, frankly, is a big betrayal.
Well, the government said there would be controls. We don't know what they are. It's true. What do you think about the front page and the announcements on the EU citizens' rights?
Well, I think it's always worth paying more attention to the announcement than to what the evil putrescence that is Paul Dacre thinks about it. But I do think that front page. I mean, what did they want the headline to be? 3.8 million people forcibly deported to make us feel better. So we're talking there about people who work in our hospitals, who work in our schools, who are looking after old people, and I think this I'm afraid the way that and the sort of UKIP agenda, and it's been the reason why UKIP is now kind of virtually disappearing, is because the Conservatives have co-opted their language, co-opted their approach to
not on immigration, they haven't, have they?
Well, I think on this is about, I think, post-Windrush, this is about them sort of trying to be less nasty than they were. But also, there's also a message in that there's quite a few Labour MPs who I think are starting to co-opt a little bit too much for my liking, the kind of UKIP approach on this. And they need to understand that as well.
Right, it's happening all over Europe, though, isn't it? To a certain extent, this discussion on migration. And whose fault's that?
Fault's kind of irrelevant to this. It is happening. I mean, Putin and Trump are the kind of apogees of this sort of movement towards what I see as nationalist authoritarianism. And I think we have to be very, very careful about it.
Alistair, people want to live in nation states. They are quite happy to cooperate.
Doesn't mean they don't want to cooperate.
No. They're happy to cooperate. They're happy to trade. They're happy to have a shared sense, that there are things at a European level but that we need to do. But what is being rejected is the model where an unelected European Commission has the sole right to propose legislation.
And they
have the sole right to propose legislation.
Governments,
you've seen just this week, the Swedish Democrats now take a big lead in Sweden, and their agenda is to have a referendum on Swedish membership of the European Union. Frankly, the European Union in its current form, Alistair, is finished.
Right, is it? I mean, is that project now under so much strain? I mean, to some extent, Brexit's being parked by the EU, Alistair, and they are looking at this issue of immigration.
Us, by the way.
But does that also say that liberal politics, the liberal elite and their views towards immigration failed?
What it says is that right around the world, these pressures are real. And the question is whether you respond to them in the way that I think Nigel has throughout his career, Salvini to Italy now, Trump in America, with what I would argue are very, very right-wing views, or whether you actually do try to reform Europe around the model of cooperation. And the tragedy for me is that we're pulling out of it at a time when these challenges, which are going to affect us whether we like it or not, we're going to have less and less influence over dealing with them.
Did you fuel hatred of immigrants, Nigel?
No, of course not. In fact, the opposite, really. I think if I hadn't existed, I suspect the British National Party would have been a much bigger force in British politics. I was able to say, because at the time, the BNP were becoming quite significant. I was able to say to people, look, if you're voting BNP, you're holding your nose and doing it. You don't like the racist agenda, but you feel it's the only outlet you've got. Come and vote for us. And you know something? Whatever attempts were made, UKIP was absolutely a non-racist political party. No question about that.
Alistair?
Let's not get into that. I mean, I do think that there's a very, very racist streak in our media. I think there is a lot of, I'm afraid there has been a lot of growing xenophobia. I think the scapegoating, the othering of immigrants has been a real problem.
We're a very liberal, tolerant country, Alistair. What people said... I
think we're becoming less liberal and less tolerant.
Well, because of what you did. You took a post-war order, starting with Windrush, that went on until Blair took power, where net 30,000 people a year came to the UK for half a century.
And then you took
over, and it became 300,000 people a year.
That's true, though.
Is it any wonder people got frustrated when they saw their towns changing, they saw their access to primary schools becoming more difficult, even getting a GP appointment?
All right,
let
us
These are real challenges, and they are real challenges that are not only... What Nigel and his people did was to make this all about immigration as opposed to some of these bigger questions. And I honestly do think that one of the tragedies of what's happening with Brexit is a lot of, I've tried to persuade the Labour Party to go in this line, tough on Brexit.
Why have you failed to persuade Jeremy Corbyn?
Let me just finish the point, is that a lot of the things that led to Brexit, which aren't necessarily to do with the European Union, we're not even addressing them. Some of these issues about standards in schools, about community cohesion, about whether we can actually lift people out of poverty. We're not addressing these because the whole machine is taken over with
And
Brexit.
on your watch, immigration did go up substantially.
Yes, it did. And I've acknowledged that in relation, we definitely underestimated the flow of immigration from Eastern Europe. However, at the time, sometimes governments have competing and clashing strategies. We were putting massive amounts of money into public services. At the moment, why is Theresa May putting this money into health service?
Because the population is going up.
No, because
she's got to.
No, because we've had several years of austerity and it's been cut. We were having to bring a lot of immigrants to do work that white working class people and white middle class people and the indigenous population didn't necessarily want to do.
And
I think that was tapped into.
We never heard that argument before 2004. We never heard that the white working class are lazy and useless.
I didn't say they were lazy and useless. I did not say that. That's a complete travesty.
You made one of the biggest political mistakes of modern times in opening up the doors in 2004. You got it badly wrong, and actually, that's why Brexit happened.
Did you exploit that? And you exploited the immigration on that basis?
Well, being able to control your borders is part of what a sovereign country does.
And how you do
illustrated.
And how you do that is important, because you've
and
been talking...
by the way, that we could control our borders, and we still can, because we're not in Schengen. And that's another sort of of myth.
Well, you just have to show a passport, but anyone can come.
But Nigel Farage, you once talked, I mean, admittedly, it was quite a long time ago, about sort of net migration levels of 50,000. I mean, do you still think that is realistic and desirable?
Yes, of course it does. And I mean, actually, what we've done with mass migration of unskilled labour is our productivity levels in the country have gone down. This has not been a net.
But is it unskilled? Why are there shortages of doctors and nurses?
Oh, that is partly our fault, and we should actually feel ashamed.
Right. So it's not all unskilled, is it?
In many cases, we should feel ashamed of taking doctors and nurses from countries that need them even more than
all right,
we
well,
do.
I mean, you've also put forward some suggestions on how to control borders, because you were supporting Donald Trump's immigration policy for illegal immigrants. Let's hear what you had to say on American television.
You know, we took a load of child migrants from Calais across the English Channel. Yeah. It turned out many of those who were called children were in fact over 18, and one of them tried to blow up the London subway. So it's very easy to be compassionate, but you've got to understand that in the case of America and these borders, many of these children are actually being used as a means to get other people in, many of whom aren't even their families. Trump has got to stay tough on this and ignore all the screams coming from the liberal media.
I mean, how incendiary is that?
He will stay tough on this, absolutely.
Then he didn't.
Yeah, and then he's backed down. So has he done the wrong thing?
He hasn't backed down. He stopped. By the way, if a family illegally tries to get into Britain, we separate the children from the parents. All right. So let's not pretend.
But do you
much difference here.
do you think that's the right policy?
I think what he did. To say, look, we are going to make sure illegal immigrants go back, but we're not going to separate children from parents was the right thing to do.
So you don't think he backed down, he showed weakness then?
Honestly, I don't think Trump will back down on this issue one little bit.
But he has, in terms of separating families. That's what caused the international outrage.
Yes,
Meanwhile,
and by the way, Obama was putting children in detention centres as well.
But the difference there was that he let those families into the country in order to get around it. That's the difference.
Let's not pretend this is just Trump.
But it is, nobody's pretending it's just Trump. It's also about how he is now seeking to use that issue for his own political ends. He's still in campaign mode. He's coming up to the midterms. And he's trying to sort of... He did that, went straight to do that rally, and he said the Democrats, they want everybody to come in. Same as, well, that's not true. The Democrats don't want everybody to come in, but he's using it. And I thought you made a terrible mistake there, Nigel. I thought to go out there and basically say because it was Trump, he's doing the right thing. You cannot justify what we have seen recently. You cannot justify.
It's gone. He's changed it, but he will make sure illegal families do not come into America.
But he's changed it.
He was elected.
He's changed it.
They will not be coming into America. They just won't be separated. But he's not going to go soft on it. 70% of Americans want tougher controls.
With the greatest respect to you, Nigel, nobody really cares what you think about immigration anymore, because the fact is the tanking of UKIP support after Brexit shows that UKIP did not represent ordinary voters' views on immigration. It feeds your kind of total misrepresentation of Brexit voters to say that we're all UKIPers. I mean, we started this conversation by talking. We started this. Your mischaracterisation of Brexit, your continual mischaracterisation of Brexit voters as sort of racist and ignorant is well known. Is well known. Let's not beat around the bush.
I'm not having that.
And you'll let me finish my point.
No, I won't.
Yeah, you will.
Well, hang on, Ella, answer that point about people being racist. That Alastair characterises people as racist.
Have I ever,
your commentary over the last two... If you'll let me speak...
Alastair, you've asked her to justify it.
I understand the question very, very well. Right. I know I said a serious thing.
When have I ever said racist or ignorant? Ever?
Right. Publicly
or privately? Just ask me that question.
Your commentary over the last... It's well known that your commentary over the last...
When have I ever said that?
Zip it for a second, please, Alastair, and let me talk, right? The commentary of you and people like you over the last... And it does get Brexiters angry, right? Because the kind of commentary that you've over the last 2 years has been pushing this idea that Brexiteers, working class Brexiteers on the whole, are ignorant and racist. We started this conversation.
Well, can we get her to finish and then I'll come back?
She's making the same point and it's a lie.
Oh, Christ. We started this conversation.
But Ella, be specific about the allegations you're making, unless you have got evidence to say that people like Alastair Campbell say all Brexiteers are racist.
Show me one example of it.
Alastair Campbell.
Thank you. You've just, in the discussion with Nigel Farage...
I don't let lies go.
Wow, you've got a word vomit problem. Hang on a second.
No, I don't let lies go.
Listen,
you justify what
it's not a lie.
Ella, do you want to retract what you said, or are you sticking to it?
I don't want to retract what you said.
Okay, fine. Well, that still stands.
Right. The point that I wanted to make before I got so rudely interrupted is that we started this conversation talking about the fact that what is it 2 years after Brexit that we should be thinking about? It's the fact that ordinary people, Brexit voters, have from the first, we've vanished into thin air. We're not part of the conversation anymore. No one is talking about why we voted for Brexit, about sovereignty, about democracy. It ends up in squabbling politicians and commentators talking about how, much we hate immigrants. That's ridiculous.
Well, there's been a lot of talk. There has been a lot of talk about sovereignty.
You seem to comment on things that don't get...
Let Raphael speak.
May I interject one thing in this, which something that has definitely been said, because it's been said around this table, and it's not an ad hominem comment about Nigel, but what he said was illegal families. Now, families are not illegal. The method by which they migrate into a country might be illegal. And we've had this long conversation about immigration, and frankly, what we've seen happening in the US, particularly with the detention centres separating children from their parents. These weren't screams of liberal media, these were screams of actual children. And a very clear lesson from the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century is that when you go down the route of dehumanising people, projecting people in a way that basically strips away their humanity, talks about them as units in some kind of political calculation, that is a path towards atrocity. And the fact of the matter is, we can debate about methods of immigration control or how to respond to the legitimate concerns of people who are worried about immigration. But right now, what we are seeing is a discourse that historically has been proven to lead towards atrocity. And I do not think history will judge us very well if, as some people around this table might be, are seen to be complicit in that process. Maybe not in 2 years, maybe not in 5 years, but in 10 years' time, we will look back and the UK politicians who currently support Donald Trump will be footnotes to a very tragic story in the history of the American Republic.
Well, maybe that's why the president intervened and decided his authorities were not doing it the right way, and he's changed the rules, and families will be kept together. The president did that.
But do you subscribe to the language that illegal immigrants are animals? Some of them.
You've talked about swarms before.
Yes,
you've talked about us being swamped with immigrants.
Swamped, yes, of course. And that's a word that previous prime ministers have used, Right. So it's not exactly outside the mainstream debate.
But can I just make it
fine, because we're almost at the end of the show.
I think Raphael's onto a really big point here. We are normalising Trump. We are normalising actions and language in our own politics now, including with Theresa May with her nonsense about the Brexit dividend and so forth. We are normalising the step-by-step degradation of a whole group of people that I think, I agree with Raphael, I think it could end in a very bad place.
We will get you both back on, maybe in another 2 years. Anyway.
Big Man Tyrone here. Make sure to subscribe to the wicked, awesome Robin Hood UKIP YouTube website. He exposes the leftist crops on the British brainwashing corporation. Nice.